One more minute.
Oh, crap.
Hi, everybody. This is Joe Morrison with the Kitsap Digital Hour and the Kitsap Economic Development Alliance. We'll get started in a minute or two. We were trying to make jokes about a minute or two ago about all the different vegetable soup, alphabet vegetable soup, names of organizations in our field. And anyway, I don't know if you have any good jokes about abbreviations that are family friendly, let me know. We'll get started in a minute. Okay, awesome. Headed north of 30 participants. That sounds fun.
Well, I'll do a throwdown for the number of letters in my acronyms because I've got WWUSBDC. Anyone have more than 7?
That's pretty good. If you have more than 7 letters when you refer to yourself as an abbreviation, please put it in the chat. Right now, WWUSBDC is winning. And we like to add the word Kitsap to that as well, really, when we're talking about Jamie. All right, as soon as I see that little number turn to 1102, we'll go ahead and get started. It's a courteous thing. It's a courtesy thing. Sometimes we sign on a little bit late to webinars. That's what we do. Okay, it changed to 1102. I think I might have said this before. Thanks for joining us for the Kitsap Digital Hour. I'm Joe Morrison. I hope that my face is fitting squarely in the screen, but I don't really know because of the setup of my computer. If you're here in Kitsap, I hope you're enjoying some of this amazing, beautiful, wonderful weather that we're having. What a phenomenal summer it is. Let's go ahead and get into it. Today is going to be a really remarkable set of presentations, which is the economic impact that COVID-19, the pandemic, and what is becoming potentially an endemic as we learn to live with this, and we continue to struggle with high case rates. What is it doing to our economy, and what is it doing particularly to the women who participate in our economy? There is a lot of data that suggests that women's participation in the workforce and in terms of economic growth has been set back remarkably by COVID-19. If a third of the workforce consists of working parents, and 2/3 of that workforce say we're having trouble dealing with childcare issues during COVID-19, well, it's going to have a remarkable impact. So we've got 2 economists with us today, as well as 2 Kitsap professionals who work in the areas of childcare and workforce and staffing, respectively. And so we're going to hear from all 4 of these wonderful folks. And the first person to speak will soon be Annaliese Vance-Sherman, who is a regional labor economist with the Employment Security Department. I think I got that right, with the state of Washington. Then we'll hear from Kristal Thomas, who is with Express Employment Professionals, Holly Tedford with the YMCA of Pierce and Kitsap counties, and Tara Kirksell of Johns Hopkins University. Super duper exciting. Can we move on to the next slide? Tonight, we're going. We thought we'd book 2 things in one day. I will be lectured and scolded for this later. We won't do it again, but we do have an amazing event tonight that we've worked really hard to put together, especially with the team from our PTAC crew and with the team from the state of Washington and who work with what are called disadvantaged business entities. It's the second BIPOC Business Forum for Kitsap. And this is all about how you could get what is called disadvantaged business entity status. You can get this at the state and federal level if you're women-owned, if you're minority-owned, if you're veteran-owned. There are certain certifications you can get that make your life better, especially when it comes to government contracting. Join us tonight, 6 p.m. Sign up now. We'll put links in the chat. And then coming up on October 14th, it's going to be about holiday shopping and how you can spend your money locally and how that benefits our community. We are setting up for our fall forum on October 19th. That is going to be probably a hybrid event. given how things are going. So you can attend digitally or you can attend in person. It's all about Kitsap's future. So join us for that. It's going to be amazing. We have a really exciting keynote speaker coming who's a futurist. So ooh, pretty cool. All right, let's get into it. Small Business Flex Fund. It's an amazing opportunity to provide financial assistance to small businesses. And let's see, looks like Jamie's going to talk a little bit before we get into Annaliese. Jamie, did you want to say something?
Thanks. For some reason, I thought I was going at the end. So thanks, Joe. Yeah, I just had a few things I wanted to mention. I'm throwing stuff up in the chat box. There's a 3-day national summit next week, and some of the seminars look pretty good. Everything's that I'm going to mention is free. The chamber just announced an October summit or a week-long summit, which lasts 2 days, which that's always kind of makes me laugh. But and we can promote that later because it's going to be a while. But I also just want to mention some things because people don't realize that when they are getting extra opportunities from the SBA based on what they've already applied for, it comes in the form of an email from the SBA. And just yesterday, for example, I was on the phone with someone and I just said, hey, have you seen this email yet offering you another $9,000? She looked it up and found the email from February 13th in her spam. So there's still the targeted EIDL advances. If you're in the low income area, I'll put out a link for that as well when I'm done chatting here. And then another thing is the shuttered venue operators grant. All those people are getting emails now that got the first round to apply for up to 50% more of what they've already gotten, but they have to see that email. And at the one point, the one offering like up to $10,000 grant, only 40% of the emails were even being opened. So if you get anything from sba.gov, do open it. If you've applied for anything, if you're a business owner. There's still lots of money left unspent. So and it's particularly available besides the shuttered venue operators grant, it's in the form of EIDL, which is the loan, the 30-year loan, low interest loan, and these targeted EIDL grants. I'll put some more information in the chat box, but and that's, I guess the only other thing to mention is the PPP forgiveness. The SBA did this portal, which says, hey, yay, you don't have to involve your banks, your lenders in getting your forgiveness. But like 90% of the lenders did not sign up for it because they said we'd rather give our customers good customer service and hold their hands throughout this process because we have all the documentation they need. Why would we want them to go it alone? So if you're going it alone because your bank signed up for the portal and you need some help, just give me a call and I'll help you figure it out. And I think that's all I've got.
And let me just ask, we're going to show your contact details at the end, but what is your world's easiest email that we could put in the chat for you?
Okay, well, here's what the thing is. I'm actually leaving tomorrow for a couple weeks in Ecuador. So we do have backup. You don't have to wait for me. And I have a really wonderful colleague from Bellingham, Kathy Bastow, who will be filling in. So it's best to use the generic email, kitsapsbdc@wwu.edu. I'll put that in the chat box.
All right, so come into the chat, kitsapsbdc@wwu.edu. Thanks, Jamie, for all that. Look for your emails from sba.gov, particularly if you operate venues, particularly if you've applied for something and your business is in a hub zone or a low income zone. There may be capital out there that you have and can get. All right, Annaliese, Vance-Sherman, please. Thanks for joining us today. Could you do us a favor and take us through some of the data and the economic impact that COVID-19 is having, especially when it comes to how it's affecting so much of our workforce, the women in it?
All right, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I love this topic, and the reason I love this topic is that it is a reminder implicitly that when we're talking about anything with the economy, fundamentally what we're talking about is people, the decisions that people are making, the way that we are navigating the world. And a lot of that gets obscured frequently in the numbers. So I always find that it's important to give that reminder when, we're talking about, I'll be presenting a lot of numbers, a lot of information that kind of talks about general trends, but fundamentally, everybody is making very intimate decisions at a household level, at a family level, at an individual or business level. And it's important not to lose sight of the myriad of stories that is taking place beneath the surface. So a lot of what I'm going to be doing in this next 20 minutes is discussing what makes this pandemic different. What is it about the COVID-19 pandemic that brought about the label of the She-Cession? What is it about this pandemic that's different than what we saw, what we've seen in previous recessions, and kind of lay the groundwork for discussion that we'll be having later on in this session about how have women in particular been impacted. So just a reminder, again, every recession is unique, but this one was a little bit different, and we'll see it in a lot of the data. The labor market impacts were deeper and much more swift than usual. And this disproportionately impacted industries that are largely female workforces. And that's not typically been the case. Usually when we see different recessions happen, I'll reference the Great Recession in a couple slides, a lot of what we see is specific industries that tend to have a great deal of variability of demand being impacted and rippling through in ways that usually affect male workforces more than female workforces quantitatively. This time it was a little bit different, both in terms of the mix of industries that were impacted, but also because typically in a recession, we see demand being impacted, demand for labor, that is. Employers see reduced demand for their products or services, and that translates into a reduced demand for labor. But this time around, the shock was both on the demand side and also on the supply side. And the stickiness, what has lasted, has been the impact on the supply of labor. That is, not only were businesses impacted by supply chains, by shifting demand and so forth, shifting their demand for labor, but individuals were impacted. Individuals' propensity to go back to the labor market, their ability to do so, was also impacted to a very large extent. So this is both demand and supply side, and that's a little bit different than what we are used to seeing. Thirdly, this recession did impact women to a greater extent than men. I'll be going over a lot of the quantitative evidence of this differential impact, but the why that isn't necessarily answered by the data is qualitative, and it is the stories that we are all living. And I'm excited to see where this conversation goes in the next part. So just as a quick visual, when we're looking at, what do I mean when I say that labor market impacts were deeper and more swift than usual? If you look at this graph, you can see that going back to 1990 in Washington State, you can see the different recessions. You can see how they kind of reach a peak, plateau at that moment, decline, and then start over again. And we've got almost this wave-like pattern that we see here in the 2001 recession, here in the Great Recession. But what happened in 2020 looks a lot different. From one month to the next, we brought ourselves back to the level we were at in 2013 in terms of the number of jobs. And then you see a fairly swift recovery coming afterwards. It looks almost as though there was a break in the data set. And that's really the hallmark of what happened. We saw just this drastic and deep decrease. We saw an increase in employment very quickly, that V-shaped recovery at the very tail. But I'll point out that still puts us back a couple years. That puts us about to where we were in terms of the employment level in 2018. In other words, even though we've still continued to increase our population in Washington State, we are not seeing that employment, we're seeing lower labor force participation. Kitsap County, very similar to Washington State when we look at the pattern of growth and, of decline and then growth coming back. Washington State as a whole lost over 400,000 jobs from February to April of 2020. Kitsap County lost about 11,000 jobs, and so far about 6,500 of those jobs have been recovered. So what do we mean by a she-cession? Well, in one respect, it's wordplay. The last recession was labeled man-session because the workforce, the impact were disproportionately impacting men in the workforce in terms of the number of jobs lost, the industries impacted. This time around, the industries that were impacted to the largest extent were workforces that are dominated by a female workforce. And so there's wordplay, but there's also both quantitatively and qualitatively evidence that women have been impacted to a greater extent this time around. And one really quick way that we can look at this is just to chart out the unemployment rate. So looking at the Great Recession back in 2008 to 2010, we can see the blue line here representing the unemployment rate for men at a national level, and the orange representing women. And we can see the man-session, the Great Recession of 2008. The peak unemployment rate for men was 11.1%, and for women was 8.7%. Fast forward through a very long recovery period, and we went from an unemployment rate in the 4% range to, for men, an unemployment rate of 13.6%, and for women, 16.1%. So clearly a much greater impact in that initial drop. Now you can also see that for the most part, we are seeing those lines converge. And this happens during most recoveries. It does not necessarily mean that qualitatively things are completely better. So I mentioned that it depends on the industry that's been impacted. And so right here, I've just laid out a comparison between the Great Recession, the job losses at the beginning of the Great Recession, compared with the job losses during the beginning of the COVID-19 recession. So blue, the Great Recession, kind of see what's going on here. This graph is representing Washington State. I've also done the same thing for Kitsap County. Very similar patterns as a whole, but statewide we can get better. There's larger sample sizes, we can get more information in statewide. So similar patterns for Kitsap though. What we saw was about 11%, or I'm sorry, back that up a minute. Construction was the signature of the Great Recession. This is a male-dominated industry. You can see about 19% of the Washington workforce in construction is female, so a very male-dominated field. Manufacturing was another that was impacted to a very large extent in terms of the proportional job losses, labeling this a man-session. One thing I'll also point out is that this blue line right here for education and health services, a very female-dominated workforce, actually continued to add jobs in the beginning of the Great Recession. So there was a bit more stability for women in the Great Recession. Now switch over to the orange bars and look at COVID-19 recession, and we can see leisure and hospitality stands out among all the rest as a generally female-dominated industry impacted to a much greater extent than any other. A couple more that I'll point out, other services. Now other services is also a female-dominated industry or set of industries. This is everything from dry cleaning services, hairdressers and beauticians, auto mechanics. As a whole, generally a female-dominated workforce that was also impacted to a greater extent than most. Retail trade as well, about 50-50 in terms of the proportion, another industry that was impacted early on. But we can see that there is that shift, and it starts with the industry itself. When we look at that recovery that's taken place, what we can also notice is that female-dominated industries continue to be the industries that are struggling to recover. So I'll just point out a couple right here. The female-dominated dark blue line here is leisure and hospitality, our restaurants, hotels, bars, stadiums, museums. It was hit the hardest and is recovering, but you can still see they're still down substantially compared to the beginning of this recession Other services, this rust-colored line, another female-dominated workforce struggling, and government, another one that also includes a lot of public schools, for example, also struggling to come back, compared to, at the upper end, information and construction that lead the pack in terms of that recovery, male-dominated workforces. So we are seeing, as this plays out, yes, an overall recovery, but one that the female-dominated workforce continues to lag behind. So I'd be remiss not to mention the question right now that's percolating in our communities, which is that of a labor shortage. And this also has a gender dynamic to it. So I'm going to be going through a couple different metrics looking at the labor force and how gender is reflected in these data sets. So first, just looking at unemployment insurance claims. Who claimed unemployment insurance in Washington state, and how has that evolved over time? So we can see in both cases, I'll start with Washington state, we're roughly at parity with the number of claims that have come in and continue to come in for women and men in Washington state's economy. But I will also point out that women's labor force participation is lower than men's, which means that even though it's the same number, roughly, there's a disproportionate representation of women in this comparison. So women continue to be disproportionately represented in our unemployment insurance claims data. In Kitsap County, you're going to see it's a bit more pronounced, and I made a point to highlight this because in Kitsap County, when we're talking about the labor force, we're talking about the civilian labor force. And the civilian labor force tends to skew a little bit more female because of the military presence. So that's what's going on here when you see that difference between Kitsap County and Washington state as a whole. Roughly, though, similar patterns with all of these. So scaling up to a national level, we can look at the labor force and break that out by gender. And we can see that in terms of back in April of 2020, women were far more likely to drop out of the labor force compared to men, not necessarily by their own choice, but a substantial 14% decline for men, 18% decline for women. Progressing forward, we're reaching more of a similar rebound, but again, there's still a lot of artifacts that persist and stay with us today from that initial drop. I do think it's extremely important anytime we're having discussions that do draw this out by gender, but to also, when we can, when the data allows and when our conversations allow, to also expand that, because anytime we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it is important to explore different intersections as well. So looking, again, this is national. First, I did this looking at men, white men, Black men, and Latinx men. And first thing that stood out is that there was no category of men that was impacted to a greater extent than the average of all women. So taking a step back and looking at women, we can see that there is quite a bit of disparity depending on what race or ethnicity you have in the United States. White women tended to recover much more quickly following a similar shape curve to what we saw with men. But when we look at Black women and Latinx women, the impacts were much deeper and the recovery is much slower. And I think that's something that we do need to work on unpacking anytime we're talking about this type of issue. Here's an interesting one. So women were more likely than men to work from home as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. One thing that's happened during this recession is we've had a lot of new data sets emerge, and this comes from the Census Bureau and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And what they've done is they've asked people, did you lose your job? Did you work from home? And this one just focuses on working from home by gender. An important caveat though, prior to the recession, we saw that more men were already working from home or had the option to telecommute than women. So this is limited to only those women whose jobs were disrupted because of the pandemic. We can see women were far more likely to work from home than men at any given month during this pandemic. However, I attribute this to a large extent, and explanations will be coming for years to unpack this data and understand it better. But what I think is going on here is that a lot of women work in fields such as education that was moved home, moved online. And so what we're seeing here, at least how I'm interpreting it, is that a lot of women were working at home with their kids, working at home, teaching kids, largely because of which segment of the labor force they occupy. So the question, why is supply not caught up with demand? We're talking about this labor shortage. How does gender figure into this? And just again, taking that step back and looking at what our general situation is, the Bureau of Labor Statistics yesterday published the finding that we have an unprecedented number of job postings right now, open job openings that have been reported by employers exceeding 10,000 job openings. And that is a challenge. The way I'm reading this is that it's not necessarily that the economy is firing on all cylinders, but we're digging out of a hole. There are a lot of, with the increased vaccine availability and the economy generally opening up, we are seeing a lot of demand for labor. We see something similar locally when we're looking at job postings. But the reality is, and those first two were looking at the demand for labor. But the reality is we are still in a pandemic and things can go sideways at any given moment. And it's really important to acknowledge that any kind of prediction that an economist or anybody else is going to give is dependent on COVID cooperating. And this is something that we need to keep in mind. So now shifting to the supply side, the labor and the availability of labor. Why are we still seeing this lag? Number one, and I'm just starting with unemployment insurance claims because I know it's an elephant in the room. The CARES Act expanded unemployment insurance eligibility and benefits to people that, so for example, gig workers, people that did not have access to traditional unemployment insurance. It also extended unemployment insurance so that people could stay on it longer. For a while, the job search requirement was not required, although that did resume in Washington State in July of this year, and the $300 bonus. So the safety net was expanded to something beyond what it normally is. And the question, did generous benefits keep workers out of the labor market? I will say to a certain extent, of course, there are going to be some people that are making that decision at a household level of can they afford to live on unemployment insurance while they are not feeling safe or able to enter the workforce. Really important date this past week, Labor Day, the CARES Act expired. And so we are going to see in Kitsap County, you can see the orange is extension of benefits. PUA is the program that expanded benefits. All of these people are going to be dropping off of unemployment benefits as of this week. But it goes beyond the simple people aren't working because of unemployment insurance. The care economy disproportionately affects women. And what I mean by this is women are far more likely to be responsible for care for their elders, for care for older family members that are at increased risk for COVID-19 exposure, which means, which makes it more difficult for somebody to be able to take that part-time or full-time job where they might risk bringing COVID-19 home to their loved ones. Women are also disproportionately likely to be responsible for care for their children. And this has really been impacted in two different ways. Number one, childcare. Affordability and accessibility was already a major challenge leading up to the pandemic recession, and it was exacerbated by that as we saw a number of childcare centers shut down or have to significantly reduce the number of children that they could work with because of social distancing requirements. Affordability and accessibility of childcare has been seriously impacted, and that will be a challenge moving forward. A lot of school was moved online and into hybrid models as well, bringing a lot of workers, disproportionately women, home to watch over their children during the school day. And even when it was able to turn to hybrid or in-person models, frequently that was for 2 days a week or only until noon, or inconsistent schedules that were really difficult to schedule work around. So care for elders, care for children, ultimately, when it comes down to it, returning to high-risk jobs is largely incompatible with the roles that women have been expected to assume in the care economy. So moving forward, I think a few things we need to think about, and some of the challenges that are disproportionately going to impact women in this moment in time, is that the longer you're out of the labor market, the resume gap, there is the risk of skills atrophy, and there's also the risk of employers looking at that gap on the resume and that being a barrier to employment. Technology has been amazing. For those of us that have been lucky enough to keep our jobs and have been moved to the online space, the proliferation of technology has been incredible as far as keeping our economy going. But it is going to present a challenge for those who were not able to ride this collective learning curve, and will present another challenge, another barrier for people that didn't get on board with the technology early on. Of course, we are still in a pandemic. Outbreaks at school could send people back home, largely women, placing women in a vulnerable position. And a lot of the industries that women are in are not returning as quickly as others. And as my final point, I'd like to reiterate that we do need to pay close attention, not only to gender, but to intersections with race and ethnicity to make sure that we are able to navigate an equitable recovery. Thank you. I'll hand it back.
Thanks, Annaliese. And I think we're pretty close to being back on track. So we have time for Q&A after the panel. So we'll just wrap any questions. There aren't any in the comments or Q&A yet. Just a reminder, please post your questions in the Q&A. Also, this will be posted on our website, and the video will go on YouTube as well as our website. So now we're going to hear from three different experts who have been dealing with this in different ways. Kristal Thomas, who is the CEO and president of Express Employment Professionals. Tara Kirk-Sell, who is a senior scholar and assistant professor for Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. That is a long title. You might win for longest title. And then Holly Tedford is the childcare operations director for YMCA of Pierce and Kitsap counties. And of course, they are providing services in Kitsap County. So I think we'll do the order of Kristal, Holly, and then Tara. So we're going to turn it over to you, share your screen, and thanks, ladies, each for sharing your expertise. So Kristal, it's you.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Annaliese. So all of the data, thank you so much. I can't wait to grab that from the website later. And we're definitely feeling it on our end. We are workforce. That's all we do. We supply contract employees to over 300 employers here in Kitsap County. We have 100+ people working in the community every week. And normally we're working on a database of 500+ available associates. Right now we're at less than 100. So we're feeling all the pain that we just looked at in those graphs right now. And we are typically running with 20, maybe 40 open jobs on the board. We get them in, we close them with 500 available workforce. Right now, we're running at over 150 open jobs on the regular that we can't fill. And there are many that we just don't even put on the board. We let our clients know we'll do our best, but those employees aren't here at this moment in time, which for a group of recruiters that love to put people to work, that is literally the most painful space to be in. And to listen to all of those statistics and know how it's looking on the ground is fairly dismal. So I'm here to uplift you a little bit on what can we do in the labor force, and what are we seeing that we can make a difference. And Annaliese touched on those gaps in employment, because we're going to see huge gaps in employment, especially with women in the workforce. And even pre-pandemic, we were looking at those gaps in employment and automatically throwing those resumes out. We see so many employers that throw those resumes out. But what are the difference in a gap in employment for male versus female? Females are typically 7 years out of the workforce to take care of children. But what skills are they using? And I just want to know if you would hire this person. They have budgeting and finance. They have inventory management, negotiation skills, scheduling and project management, coaching and mentoring, organizational skills, attention to detail, time management and prioritization, decision making and problem solving, conflict resolution and crisis management, internet and computer skills, and self-motivated. Is that not an employee that we all want on our team? I would hire that person all day long, but we're passing them by because they have a gap on their resume. And most homemakers, when we interview them, it is one of the most vulnerable spots in their life. They're coming back into the workforce. They don't think they're valuable. They don't think of all of those skills that they did. They're like, I'm just a mom. Like, have you ever met just a mom? Like, even the worst mom is not just a mom. So there's all of this baggage that comes with that. So the first thing we got to do as employers is stop minding that gap. Stop throwing out resumes because there's a gap in it, and start asking questions about what happened in that gap. And offer returnships. I would say during this pandemic, from early 2020 until now, maybe you let go some employees that were great culture fits. They were great skill fits. Everything was there, but they had childcare issues. They had homeschooling issues. Those things, let's offer them to return to work. Make that a prerequisite to being hired versus a stopgap to push them out of being hired. I think you're going to find higher engagement from those employees as well, which is what we're seeing. One of the stories I want to tell is one of my personal internal employees, and she is a recruiting specialist, which means she's the one that is out there searching. She's scraping the internet to find every person with skills that wants to work, and she's cold calling those people like, hi, Kathy, this is Samantha. I just wanted to offer you a job. You're like, how did you get my number? Don't ask. She scrapes everything, right? That's her entire job. She came from Target, from retail. And she has a toddler, 4 years and below. So she's a busy woman. And her husband is in management. So obviously he's not going to leave to go grab the kid. And that's where that imbalance starts. So then she was missing work to take the kid to school, or the daycare closed because there was COVID. So now she's got to be home and switch her schedule to night shifts, where then she's getting paid a little bit more, but still under $15 an hour. And with their combined income, they don't qualify for any childcare credits. They don't qualify for any of the programs to help support. Sorry, there's my dog in the background. Hi, buddy. And like the beauty of working from home, right? And she took all of her vacation pay. She had 2 weeks of vacation because she knew, I have to find a better job. She took her vacation to full-time 80 hours spent on applying for positions. She had gaps in her resume because of the childcare issues. She didn't have any computer work on her resume, but I knew she was doing all of that. I hired her internally because she had so much drive and self-motivation, but had I looked at her resume only, I wouldn't have even interviewed her. But because of her drive, I was like, she took 2 weeks off to look for a job. I want to talk to this person. And she is one of my hardest working employees. She jumped in. She's already taken over marketing, and because she's been doing all of those things from home. And those are the employees that we're looking over, that we're passing by just by looking at their resume. I would say 100% stop looking at resumes. Call me or Monica, we'll get you hooked up with an employee, because those resumes aren't showing all of the things that they could do. Get them in for interviews, get them in for job shadows. That's one thing we can do. And another thing we can do is childcare. I know some of my other panelists are going to talk about childcare, but we see so many women who've exited the workforce because there was no childcare available. They're paying, and I hope they're going to share some of this, but it's like $12,000 to $14,000 a year on childcare. It's more cost effective to stay home and then fall below that income gap, right? And I know there's some demonizing of benefits programs, but it's a better deal for them to stay at home, qualify for those programs, and raise their children than to try to force it into childcare that they can't afford and then lose their job because they had to, the childcare closed because they were sick. There was a COVID outbreak, the economy shut down, whatever it is, or there's a special program they got to take the kids to. It's a big problem, childcare in the United States in general. And that's why most women are pulling out of the workforce. Like I said, in our office services, we're seeing an influx of applications from retail, hospitality, all the stuff Annaliese talked about, all of those hard hit, but they're not coming back to those jobs either. They're working on skills building, they're working on increasing their office, volunteering, so that they don't have to come back to those careers because the time off is so inflexible. So another thing that we can do is make sure that we have that flexible time off. Can your employee take time off to take care of childcare issues? Can they take time off for a sporting event? Or is our culture so closed to that? Because we can jump into all the centuries old stereotypes, if you will, but we don't talk about men taking time off for that. But we'll stop from hiring a woman because she takes time off for childcare. And she's holding the burden of that. And when hard times hit, all of those old stereotypes, we fall back on those traditional gender roles, and those inequities are just supersized. And we're seeing it nonstop in the workforce. So check your culture. Is your culture saying, no, you can't take time off for that, you're going to lose your job? And that's a lot of our hospitality. And that culture's got to change to help them. We also need to check our culture on if we're in a male-dominated industry that's booming, and you have a whole workforce of women that can't come into your workforce. Example, we have a construction company, they're booming, they need people, they can't find people, they'll take general laborers and teach them and train them up. I said, I have 6 women right now who want to break into construction. How about we market to them? And he said, if I brought a woman in, I would have to fire half of my staff. I said, wait, why? Because his staff is sexist, and there would be the jokes, there would be sexual harassment case. I'm like, so we need to shift your culture, then bring the women in. So if your culture is excluding women, you're excluding 50+% of the workforce because of that culture. So as an employer, check that culture. Are you inclusive to women? Is it comfortable for women to work in your workspace? Because we see it a lot on our end. We get the calls that say, no, we need a guy. Well, but you need someone who can lift this amount regularly. You need someone who has these skills and this work ethic. And I'm telling you, it's this person, but your culture won't uphold that. That's a big thing that we can change in all of those industries that are booming right now. Manufacturing, construction, all of those male-dominated spaces. And then the other is for the employee side. Really quick, as I finish up, is keep your skills fresh. Do online. If you have ever been an employee with Express or activated with us, you can jump on Express Learn and build skills, and it's free. And stay connected, stay on social media, stay on LinkedIn, make those connections, because if you're friends with Tara Kirksell and she's hiring, you might be able to zip in and say, hey, Tara, can you get me an interview? I really want to start working with your company. So, and rebalance the load. You can't look for a job. If you can't take 2 weeks off to get a job, then you've got to rebalance the load and find some other people, your partner, your kids, to delegate that stuff to. Because if you're running on empty and dying of decision fatigue, you can't look for a new job. So feel free to reach out to me. I will help you on any time. Otherwise, I will pass it off.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, culture. We've been hearing a lot about culture in the past months. And Holly, now if you want to focus on something that both Annaliese and Kristal brought up, which is the childcare dilemma.
Yes, thank you. Hold on one moment here. Can you guys see that? There we go. Perfect. Yes. Well, thank you so much. Yes. So childcare, it's a big, big conundrum. You know, we want to provide the best childcare experiences we can for our families. But again, as Kristal and Annaliese talked about, this labor shortage has definitely been a struggle, especially for childcare. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what the Y is doing, especially for Kitsap County, and how we are there to serve the families, serve the kiddos, and serve the community. So the Y is a leading nonprofit serving these youth and families. And really it's their mission really is to provide programs that help families and these youth thrive. So specifically in Kitsap County, there are 11 sites currently available. We would like to open the 3, but because of this labor shortage, we had to make some difficult decisions. So the before and after school program from January 2020 to now, we've served over 2,000 students, 350 kiddos in summer camp, and we had about 600 kiddos that was on some kind of assistance, whether that's DSHS, whether we gave financial assistance. So here's a list of the sites that we have currently available. And like I said, there are 3 that are asterisked that we are trying as hard as we can to get in. We're calling them a program on pause because we don't want to say they're canceled. We are planning on getting them back in. But again, we want to hire quality staff to do that. So we don't just want somebody to come in. We want people who are committed and quality individuals to help our families and kiddos. So within our programs, we really focus on the whole child, not just academic support, not just really a babysitter. We really want to make sure that we wrap around the child as much as we can, offering enrichment, physical activity. We try to get them moving at least an hour every session, morning and afternoon. Now, this was especially important for, during COVID and during that distance learning, them on the computers all day. This was a huge asset to their lives and to their families. Again, providing healthy snacks and meals. And in Kitsap County, we were open 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. in hopes that that would help our families able to go to work if that's something that they were able to do. Again, this goes through really our program quality. In our curriculum, we make sure and emphasize those enrichment activities, those physical activities, leadership, development opportunities, things that they might not usually get maybe in schools, but they can have the social aspect and dynamic at the Y. We also partner with WSU, and they help us with our STEM. They're making sure that kiddos are introduced to the science, technology, engineering, and math. So not only are we, like I said before, we want to make sure that we have that quality professional staff in our programs. We want to make sure our programs are quality, but we also make sure that we have access for all. And like I said before, you know, we have stood by making sure our kiddos really have those healthy snacks and meals. You know, 60,000 meals were served in the last, you know, year and a half, and we wanted to make sure that kiddos had, you know, had what they needed, and anything and everything we could do for that, making sure that we would address those food insecurities for those families. So as we know, childcare really changed in COVID. I mean, there's a lot of things that we didn't know we had to know until COVID hit. One thing that is a pretty cool opportunity that we had was that even through COVID, from, you know, when it really hit February, March 2020, we never stopped providing care. We never closed. A lot of other smaller organizations had to, because of their staffing, because of what it took to have a site open during COVID. And one of the great things that the Y has is partnerships with school districts. You know, superintendents, especially with Central Kitsap and Bremerton, Aaron Prince and Aaron Lavelle, they really helped making sure that we had the space we needed because of the social distancing. But with that, you know, we really adapted and evolved, and we wanted to make sure our programs were with purpose, and made sure that we had time to integrate for distance learning and hybrid learning. Made sure we had the iPads and computers and hookups and, you know, Wi-Fi that actually worked. And, you know, following the CDC and DOH guidelines, making sure that safety is a top priority every day, all day. And that meant making sure that staff knew what that was, really communicating with DOH, making sure that our staff was set up for success. So again, with this access for all, it was very important for the Y to provide care, even if we weren't sure where those funds were going to come from. I know you guys remember that there was talk, you know, in you know, the grants and the fundings that the government was going to provide, but we made a decision to provide care before that even came to us. And it actually took a good 9 months to a year to get that funding. So the Y was really dedicated to serve kids and serve families, making sure those single moms had care for them to go to work if they were able to. And here's some of the discounts we have provided and still do to this day. There's across the board, it's whether you are a staff of the Y, district employee, discounts, military, foster kids. We want to make sure, and again, have access for all. And we work with every family, making sure that we provide and give them the assistance any way we can. We will help them navigate. We will help them give resources, because we know how important a wraparound program like this is to families, especially now during COVID. And Charlie Davis, our CEO, he knows and he values the partnerships that we have. He knows that this is the main reason why childcare has been able to be offered the last 18 months, is because of the partnerships that we've had. So again, you know, we could not do what we do without these partnerships. So one thing I wanted to relay is a story that I heard from one of my program directors here a few weeks ago, was that she was involved with a single mom. She was an obstetrician, or is an obstetrician, and because babies were still coming during COVID, she had to work. She had an older kiddo in our program, and she had a 4-year-old. and the 4-year-old's childcare closed because of COVID. It was more of a mom and pop childcare. So she voiced her concerns, said, I can't work, we can't come here, I don't know what to do. Well, our staff actually filed for an emergency waiver for the 4-year-old to come in our program that usually serves ages 5 to 12. So that mother was able to bring both of her kids to the Y program in the morning, 6 a.m. so she could still work. So we try as hard as we can to do everything we can, especially with COVID, to make sure that families are served. So, and again, I have to put in a plug. If any of your businesses want to support our partnerships, we're always looking, because as you guys know, the need is greater than anything we've ever imagined. So we appreciate all you guys do for your employees, and we're here to help, we're here to serve. If you need anything, I'll make sure to put some information in the chat. But like I said, we're here to serve, and we appreciate all of you. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Holly. And just a quick follow-up. If someone is not either at a school or close to one of your programs, are there other similar programs that you are aware of?
I believe so, not within the schools. And I know because of the shortage, as we all know, of bus drivers, transportation is very limited. So, and that's part of the reason why we're trying as hard as we can to get those other 3 schools going ASAP, because transportation is so limited. I have to be honest with those three schools are what we're focusing on right now, knowing that the transportation is not, they're stretched so thin. So I don't know of another program, but I can definitely get that out to you guys if you guys wanted some more information, especially for those 3 schools or around those 3 schools. And I know we still have spots available in the schools that are running, so.
Okay. Oh, super. Stacy from Kitsap Community Resources said that they have early Head Start and Head Start throughout Kitsap. So that's
Perfect.
one thing.
Perfect.
Yeah, and we'll have to do some research on what's available in North Kitsap, because I didn't see any schools in North. So
yeah, you know, I do know that I did some research too, and I saw that I know in Kingston they have the Boys and Girls Club, and I believe there's that Martha and Mary that also is in North.
okay,
Yes,
super.
yes,
So
yes.
there are something similar. Super.
Yes,
Thank
yes.
you.
Sure.
Okay, Tara. So now Tara has some from a different perspective to share with us, and as with the others, I'm looking forward to hearing from Tara. So thank you.
Sure. Should I share my slides now, Holly? Are these your slides? Okay, great.
There you go. Sorry.
That's okay. And then 1 second. All right, so you got a little preview there of what we're going to talk about. So just to introduce myself, I'm Tara Kirksell. I actually have recently moved back to Bremerton. I was living in Baltimore, and I still actually work with the Johns Hopkins Center for Health Security. But I grew up in Bremerton. I was part of that Kirk swimming dynasty, and really realized that this is the place that I wanted to be. But I have worked in pandemic preparedness and response for 12 years at this point. So bring that perspective here in this little bit of shift of gears on the panel. I also, have kids at home. Basically I'm like, very typical of this pandemic, dealing with the kids at home, the childcare issues, making some crazy decisions, deciding that I don't want to live in the city anymore. I'm going to work remote. Told my bosses that this is my plan. And so, I think that they were very accepting of it. So that was very, refreshing. The other thing that I do a lot of work on is dealing with misinformation and disinformation. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that as well at the end. But I have to say that I'm so happy to have my kids in school. Starting this week, my kindergartner joined my second grader in a Bremerton elementary school. And so I'm very excited for that, although the relief did start earlier when I did have them in YMCA camp earlier this summer. So thank you for that, Holly. Such a relief to be able to concentrate on my work. You know, it was an incredibly challenging time. You can see here my coworker during the pandemic is not very neat or tidy. You know, we just know that the issues during COVID-19, when it came to women, when it came to you know, working, was that we couldn't deal with the caregiving was such a huge burden, dealing with thinking about that social distancing and variable risk aversion that we all have. We have a different sort of level of risk tolerance, and we have to sort of navigate that, make decisions every time about what kind of risk we're taking, and that is exhausting. And we're dealing with a lot of uncertainty and unknowns, you know, what's true, what's not true, and how do I even sort that out? The financial burdens, the technological and space limitations. You know, I would prefer not to be sharing my office with a small coworker, but here we are, right? Someone has to sort of pay attention. The career setbacks that we have going on, the sort of sacrifices we're making because of you know, these decisions, these hard decisions, and we're only one person, we only have so much time. And also just that lack of agency. It's hard to sort of decide exactly what we're doing for ourselves. So in the more tactical situation, you can see here what, you know, this is my experience of working home while kids are remote learning. You know, we've got interruptions every 3 minutes. We're pulled in multiple directions. You know, we have this high level of stress. We're making up work at 3 a.m. because that's the only time that we can have an hour where we're not interrupted by someone. You know, should we go with the headphones versus having the audio on? The headphones mean that you don't have to pay attention to what's happening in class and you can do your work, but you don't pay attention to what's happening in class. And then your kid comes out at the end of the day with like a million homework assignments and you don't remember how to do Common Core math. And so now you're in trouble. You know, dealing with the battles with the kids about homework, the burnout of just so much going on. How can you go another day? And, you know, this dependence on grace from coworkers, you know, there's, you know, we all know we're in a tough time and that grace was abundant at the beginning, but at some point someone is tired of covering for you. And then just decision-making in a crisis, when you have all these things on top of you, have to make hard decisions. And sometimes you make some decisions that seem kind of crazy to others. I think that some people would say my move back to the West Coast maybe was a decision that was, you know, made in a crisis, but, you know, I'm certainly happy with my decision there. But, you know, some people I think were like, you're blowing up your life, Tara. You know, I think that there's a lot going on here that we have to deal with. You know, I'm just going to cover some of these overall facts. You've heard a lot already, but, you know, we know from some reports that COVID-19 cost women $800 billion in 2020. They're just disproportionately represented in the low wage jobs with the greatest effects from COVID. You know, we know that a lot of people left the workforce just here. I found this one just between August and September 2020. To me, that shouts, I don't know what I'm going to do about school, about not being able to cover what's going on with school. We talked about the gaps for lost childcare and how that's a lot of times there for women. And that, you know, what I've talked about here, that information is pre-Delta. This last Delta wave which may actually extend these hardships longer than we were hoping. We hoped that by the time we came to September, we would be moving along, turning a page here. And so this Delta wave has been really frustrating for everyone. So, you know, just from my public health perspective, I try not to do too much forecasting because, quite frankly, this pandemic has been throwing us a lot of curveballs. But if I could talk about some of the positives that are coming in the next few months and the challenges that are coming down in the next few months, I will say, I think that we can expect a pediatric emergency use authorization for 5 and plus, likely before the end of the year. I really hope that it'll be October, November. Just so you know the details of that, the clinical trials going on right now. FDA asked for those trials to include additional children because they wanted to make sure that they could check for these rare events. So those slowed them down a little bit. That we expect Pfizer to be submitting their data in September if they are still on schedule. So that would mean in October, November EUA if things are working out. So we may see vaccines for these kids at that point. But we also probably will see this continuation of the Delta wave into several more weeks into the fall with possible bounces around the holidays. It's unclear really when we'll reach the peak, although we have sort of seemed to level off a little bit. On the positive side, we know that in high vaccination areas, we are seeing fewer deaths than before. So that these high risk populations, older folks have gotten vaccinated, and we know that the vaccine is doing a great job preventing people who are severely ill, who have the odds of becoming severely ill from ending up in the hospital and dying. The transmission question is a little bit more fuzzy, but we do know it does a great job against severe disease. But on the other hand, we can expect to see further emergence of variants. As great numbers of people get infected, there's much more virus being created in people's bodies, and every time a new virus is, a new virus is born or whatever, there is a chance that the DNA or the RNA is changed a little bit, and every time that happens, there's the odds that maybe this change could cause it to be more competitive, more transmissible, better at infecting other people. So that's why when we have these huge surges that we had, for example, in India, and now we're seeing here, these can cause new variants, which can then lead to some additional issues that we can't really predict based on what we're experiencing right now. We know that COVID-19 is not going to completely disappear, but with the tools that we have, it really does seem like it can be controlled. But it's going to require us to commit to some of those things. And additional vaccinations could be needed at some point, but I think at this point, the jury's out on whether we're going to need a booster immediately or if there's more time before something like that's going to happen. So just a couple of public health perspectives on keeping kids in school and daycare. I talked about this with the Maryland State legislature last week, I think, but we talk about no mitigation measure is perfect, but that these layered a constellation of imperfect measures here really do help to, in addition to each other, reduce risk. So we know that ventilation and filtration is critical. Portable HEPA air filters, improvement to HVAC systems, open windows. I emailed the Bremerton superintendent about these things, and I'm happy that he reported that most of the things that I would actually ask for are in place, and I feel very confident about that. Masking is very important, spacing, but these other two things here are beyond the control of the schools, right? Reducing disease in the community. Really hard to not have a COVID problem in your classroom when you know that huge rates of the disease are happening in the community, and these are unvaccinated kids. And also increasing the vaccination rates, like I said before, lower the odds of severe outcomes, and that changes the perspective, the risk perception here, or the risk calculation here. When we know that through vaccination, this can be reduced to not any worse than the flu, then we have a different risk calculation on what we can handle in our community. So I just wanted to briefly talk about difficult conversations here. My work in dealing with mis and disinformation. This is really hard because people are really committed to their perspectives right now. And these perspectives, messages that they've received, the mis and disinformation really coincide with critical, internally held values and beliefs. And so when you disagree, some people consider it a personal insult against the things that they think are important. And so this is really hard. Now, I just want to show you this cartoon here from Pictures in Health. It's a 1930s publication from the American Public Health Association. I fact-checked this. It is true. And this is actually a real thing that was created in the 1930s, but you can see, it could be perfect for today. But this is also a good example of how you sort of sort out if information to identify or check for false information. So I really wanted this to be true, but I was like, this is almost too good to be true. I got to check this. So here are the tools that you can use, that you can take home to use when you're talking to others that maybe are helpful in arming your community, your workplace, whatever, with the tools necessary to sort of sort through all this information, because we are getting so much information right now. It's hard to tell what's true and what's false because it's just so much. And we pick and choose based on sort of things that resonate with the way we already see the world. And that can really be sometimes dangerous because it can lead us down, some unsustainable paths there. But first of all, you can use web-based tools to assess source credibility. You can put on NewsGuard onto your computer so it can check the websites that you're going to. The one that I use the most is to verify with other news sources or to use fact-checking sites. And at the end of this, I have a couple fact checks that I really like to use. But fact-checking sites, usually if there's a rumor that's been out there enough that you're going to get it, you're going to see a fact check on it online if you Google the fact check. So that can be really helpful in sort of sorting through, because a lot of mis and disinformation is founded in a kernel of truth. And so, it's partially true. And then you're like, how do I sort it out from there? And so these fact checks can really help you do that. The other thing to do is, review that content from the source. Let me just check my watch, make sure, okay, I'm going to go quickly. But to review the content from the source, to make sure that, hey, it's not just one guy posting random things on a website, right? There's an editorial oversight here that's going on. We need to make sure that, it's something that people are actually doing internal sort of policies about providing true information. Be wary of messages designed to appeal to your emotion, increase your awareness of disinformation tactics. So actually this has actually been gamified. And if you play different games about talking about mis and disinformation, you can actually learn more about the tactics that are being used against you. And studies have shown that you are then more resistant or resilient to mis and disinformation. Finally, understand your own personal biases and ability to change your opinion when you get new evidence. Here, just to when responding to people who believe false information, this is always a tough conversation. You can probably assume that you're going to have this conversation a few times. It's not a one, you're not going to solve their problem with mis and disinformation the first time you talk to them. But the most important thing is to engage respectfully, to connect on values and talk about those tactics that I was talking about. Discuss some alternative explanations, right? What are other ways that we can explain what's going on here? Encourage verification using those fact check sites, and then to provide true information and alternative information sources. And at the end, I've also provided one information source that you could use. It's very difficult here because many people who believe false information have a hard time trusting government sources. And so you can't just send them to the WHO or to CDC because they already don't trust that. So we need to have something else that is sort of, that they feel like is not part of some conspiracy or something. And here, just when you come across false information online, this is something I like to just say because this happens to us, but don't repeat the lie, don't retweet it and then say this is wrong because whatever. You can definitely, it's important to, respond, or it's important to, you shouldn't just ignore it, but this is something to be careful that you, because people believe the lie is much more attractive to people than whatever the truth is. And so you have to be careful because you can actually end up elevating this false information because, if you didn't retweet it, it would have only gone to the person's 10 followers, but now it goes to your 4,000 followers and now everyone sees it. So if you don't know the source, the direct source, it's not legitimate, limit your direct engagement with that person or that source. Report it to social media companies and make sure you provide true information. Okay, so here's the resources. I think this is going to be provided later, but there's I've worked on this. I talk to my friends and family about getting vaccinated for COVID-19. Some internet fact-checking sources here. And then also here's an example of a non-government information center about COVID-19 that might be acceptable to some folks. And it has a lot of information on it. So I'm cognizant of the time, so I want to stop the share here and get back to everyone else. Yeah, happy to answer some questions.
Okay, so I have one open question, and it's, what's the best advice we can give our kids moving forward? So probably Tara or Holly or both, since Tara had that adorable coworker, and Holly's dealing with kiddos.
Yeah. So my kids, they understand COVID is real. They understand that it's something they want to avoid getting, but they're not too scared of it, right? We have not sort of highlighted as a big thing that they need to worry about. They're good about wearing their masks. I personally don't love wearing my mask, but I try to never complain about it in front of them. Because that's when they don't like wearing their masks. So, I think when talking about COVID, we're just talking about how to be careful about not getting it. But at the same time, I don't hype it up as something that they need to be afraid of. It's, severe outcomes in kids can happen for sure. And that's why we're taking these measures, but they're still fairly rare. So I don't want to scare them when there's no need to scare them. I want them to be able to live their lives and have their childhood.
Super.
And that's kind of what I was going to say about our programs, is that we definitely want to make sure we're safe, and we kind of teach them about why we are washing our hands more, why we're wearing the mask. But I think our programs are trying to make it in a fun light. We're trying to make it where it's like, cool, what kind of mask do you have on today? We're trying to uplift it so that it's not so scary. But I think, making sure that they understand it's a serious thing, but we can still have fun. So
Good. Yeah. So just a common sense approach, like we should be doing with other things with our children. I had a question that, so is there any kind of connection to all this disinformation, misinformation regarding the workplace? What kind of impact would that have?
Well, I'm going to turn your question around a little bit because, I want to refer back to some, there's the Edelman Trust Index. I don't know if most of you are familiar with it, but it's that one of the most trusted sources of information for people is their employer. And it can be a place where many people can get that factual information. I've been doing focus groups with home healthcare workers, and they, their information that they're getting about the vaccine is often from their employer. And that can be really helpful. And so, I think that employers are often trying to be very careful not to, alienate people by stepping too far. But I do think that they can provide that factual information that's really critical for us to get out of this pandemic. We need people to get vaccinated. We need people to, when the cases are high, to take those precautions. When they're low, I think that there's a lot more flexibility.
And I would love to add to that, thank you, Tara, is don't be afraid to have the conversations with your employees and be open with where you got the information from and sharing that. Too often we try to kind of hide it off in the little corner and makes it seem shady, but just be open in those conversations with employees because they do trust you.
Okay, great. I had a question. So Kristal and Annaliese both referenced the, hospitality and traditional careers that women are going in. And many have said, I don't want to go back to that. It was stressful. It didn't really, work with my family, etc. So what are those industries supposed to do to attract the workforce that they're all advertising for in their windows?
I think some of that is that culture, in making sure that you have a culture where it's okay for them to take time for their family. Typically in a hospitality restaurant industries, they're not getting their schedule until 2-3 days or a week before. So like a set schedule as much as possible. I know that's difficult in hospitality, but any kind of set schedule so that they can actually work with their kids' programs. If they're working until 9 o'clock at night and all the Y programs end at 6, what are they supposed to do from 6 to 10, right? So finding those flexibilities that you can do, reinventing yourself a little bit to make those concessions can help attract them back.
Yeah, I agree completely. A lot of it is centered around culture, but I also think one of the challenges that makes this recession a little bit different is that usually at this point, we've got a high unemployment rate that's sustaining for a while, and it's great for employers because they've got a lot of people that they can choose from. And right now, since there are so many constraints on the supply side, it is forcing employers to be, basically, they've got the challenges of the pandemic, as well as all the challenges of the long, strong recovery in terms of attracting the right people. And so employers kind of are facing both the challenges of a strong economy and the challenges of a weak economy simultaneously. So a lot of it, there is a lot of creativity that's involved around thinking about what is it that job seekers are looking for, and having conversations about wages and hours, and really thinking about what types of flexibility might be there that hadn't been imagined before.
Any other comments from anyone? No. Yeah, flexibility keeps coming up in everything I read. Culture comes up a lot. And I think something we all need to remember is that when people say, I want it to go back to normal, that normal will never exist again. I think we just have to face that and figure out what is the best new normal that we can create. You know, I don't know if any of you are doing programs or hosting workshops or know of workshops where people can learn how to examine their culture, learn, you know, as Tara did, how to examine, where does this information come from? Is it true? Is it partly true? What am I supposed to believe? You know, where can people go to just really get the best information they can to help their company grow and to make their employees feel safe?
I'm like, yeah, where can they go? That's a great question. I mean, there are quite a few programs. I mean, KEDA offers a lot of programs. The chambers offer a lot of business programs. Kitsap Business Forum offers a lot of programs that they can get involved with. And I would say employees too, to keep your skills and your connections fresh, like stay in all of that stuff. There's so much online that you can access and get some of that. Mike just threw in WorkSource. Absolutely. They're a fantastic resource. So I think there's a ton of places to go. Not always the capacity, the mental capacity, especially for our women, to go there. So we have to keep, as employers, pushing it out there, sharing it on social media so that they're seeing where to find the information. It's not a one and done, share the information.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like each of you to answer this. What is one positive outcome that you hope may emerge after this pandemic for women?
Well, I'm happy to go first. I mean, obviously for me, it's the flexibility to be able to live where I want and have the job that I want. And I think that flexibility, I hope it's here to stay. I think that it is important for people to have the flexibility. I mean, as long as school ends at 3:35, then, we got to figure out, how to deal with that. Part of that can be going to aftercare, but just the flexibility, the hours, and the ability to work remotely, I think are really important.
Okay.
I'll echo the flexibility for sure. And one thing that I've noticed with my kids, the way that they're interacting, I'm hopeful that there will be a generational impact where kids get along with their siblings better in the long run, and that they've got a better communication after going through this together.
I think for me, definitely the flexibility, but as childcare, it's definitely made us reimagine how we can kind of start a new way of childcare, and how, the programming and the social distancing and the way that we can help with hybrid learning. And, we never would have thought we'd have computers and before and after school program, but that's kind of the way now. So I think it's been a neat experience now that we have a little bit of time away, because it wasn't that neat in March and April of 2020, but now we can really see how we can reinvent and reimagine how we program. So I think, thinking outside the box, forced to do it, I think it might be a blessing in disguise.
I think it's the deeper level conversations that we're having, especially I'm working with over 300 different employers and companies, and being able to have these deep conversations on equality, on culture, on wage analysis, and just really amazing open conversations that we didn't take the time to do before, or if we did, they were more surface. So I think that's a really positive thing to come out of all of this.
Yeah, I think we're all learning to just be more aware. And I do think it has kind of encouraged some of us to be more inclusive and more expressive in our grace and mercy as we're dealing with coworkers than perhaps before, just because we're kind of all in that same level of anxiety and exasperation at times. So, just remember, they're probably having a challenging day as well. It's not just me, but not every day. So I encourage everyone to read the comments, and we will put that in a format that we can post with the presentations. There have been a lot of great comments, some links. Carol just posted that the Y has a virtual community forum for support. So I am so happy that each of you were able to join us today and share this information. It was great, great comments from those that are attending. And Joe, I'm just going to ask you to carry us out. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Kristal. Thanks, Annaliese. Thanks, Tara. And thank you so much, Holly. Really appreciate it. For the folks out there in the audience, if you would please email us, get in touch with Kitsap EDA. I think this is really kind of the second time we've talked about this year, and the first time was maybe a 20-minute conversation. Obviously, we needed to have a longer conversation about this, and that conversation should be sustained in our community because it's affecting such a large population, and we'd like to keep it front of mind. So if you have ideas on how to do that, reach out to KEDA. I've put in a plug for tonight's BIPOC Business Forum. It's all about business certifications. It's all about government contracting, and for women-owned, for people of color-owned businesses. There's a lot of benefits that you can get from that. And I think, did I put in the link? I'm not sure I did. So I will. That link is right there. Thanks to everybody for joining us. I think we have some final slides that Teresa will probably show. They include Jamie's contact details. They include our contact details. But hey, maybe we gotta find those. So without further ado, I think we're gonna call it. And thank you for joining us today, this afternoon. But we are gonna do something tonight, right, Tracy Flood? We'll see you there. All right, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.